What do you think of this print?
Negative PPI, as we all know, our core view is that China is deflationary. It's not inflation, compared with the rest of the world. High unemployment, youth unemployment, 16.7% last month. So it's a slack capacity, the output gap is negative. So it's clear that the property market has been struggling. It's hard to see that China is facing inflation despite the higher CPI here, 2.1%, but our yearly forecast for the whole year is 2.2%.
So for those that are concerned that maybe this kind of reopening story, this growth rebound in China could lead to inflation peaking, coming back in a big way this year, you're saying no to that discussion.
Exactly. This reopening, the Chinese New Year, festive spending, lots of people, traffic's coming back. But the spending itself, if you look at the tourism receipt, it's still 70% below the pre-COVID level, compared with the same Chinese New Year back in before COVID period. So I think that the economy is still looking bad to some extent with negative output gaps. It's hard to see any inflationary pressure. This spike in CPI, perhaps just because of sequential pent-up demand, is not going to last very long.
Well, where do you think the unemployment situation goes this year?
Youth unemployment, right? Yeah. Double digit.
It's come down already.
It's gone down, gradually, and hopefully, our GDP is 5.4% this year, compared to 3% last year, 2022. But 1.5 percentage point comes from the base effect. So overall, we just see there's a 4% GDP growth. It's hard to see that a big decrease in the jobless condition in China.
What about migrant workers? Are they returning to work?
To some extent, they are trying to look for a job, but at the same time, do they have the incentive to go back to the city? I believe that after COVID, there might be some behavioral change of Chinese labor and workers as well, and especially people that's been locked in the factory for a long time. Are they willing to go back to the factories? It takes time for them to regain the confidence, to be back to normal.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that's something that in the US and Europe, when they reopened from COVID, you suddenly had all these weird things happening in the labor market. Do you expect the same thing in China?
To some extent, they are similar, but of course, it's the driving force is very different. To some extent that they have been shocked by COVID and lockdown last year. Right. A couple of times after Shanghai lockdown, and also what happened in Zhengzhou in the fourth quarters, that might have some impact, on them. But the reality is that even if they want to look for a job, right now the economy is, the demand side is not looking well. It's hard for them to find a decent job, and go back, induce them to go back to the city.
What about the service side of the economy? Or are you talking about service and manufacturing? Because when you talk services, then you get into wage inflation, for example.
Correct.
And we've seen services pick up substantially in January. Does that continue?
Yes, non-manufacturing PMI is up to 54, a strong rebound compared with December. But we had seen that before, after the national lockdown in 2020, with a couple of months of improvement. Overall, in the end, ultimately, we really need to look at the property market in order to push not only the manufacturing sector, but also the service sector as well.